In August of 2008, we visited with Charlotte Iserbyt at her home in Maine. Charlotte Iserbyt was, during President Ronald Reagan's first term, the senior policy advisor on education. Charlotte Iserbyt has written several books and pamphlets and also has 2 different websites that we'll talk about later during this program. But for now, here is Charlotte Iserbyt in her own words.
I grew up on Long Island, New York, in Port Washington. And I left Port Washington when I went to school in New York City, and then I worked down on Wall Street for a while, and then I went abroad. I wanted to go abroad. I was always oriented towards seeing the world and finding out what was going on. And I'm a real individualist. I mean, in the sort of normal sense of the word. I'm not saying it's great to be one or not, but I am. I don't like collective groups and functions. You'll never find me, people might say, oh, she never does anything in the community. No, I don't, because there are enough people doing everything in the community, and my feeling is that there aren't enough people helping to counteract the very evil agenda that has been imposed on our country for well over 100 years.
Why do you think individualism has become so unpopular?
Oh, because they don't want us around. I mean, it's so obvious that John Dewey, he explained very clearly that, you have to get rid of the individual. We've all got to cooperate and be a member of the collective. Right. That's, of course, the communist thing. But anyway, so I was not one of those people to hang around and become part of the society that I grew up in. And I remember when I went overseas, I joined the American Red Cross during the Korean War, and I was supposed to be going to Korea. But they changed my orders at the last minute, so I went to Guam, and I was stationed at Andersen Air Force Base, where actually, it's very interesting, one of the SAC bombers was very sad, went down there. I always notice Andersen when that happens, because I was there for a year, and that was very interesting to be there. There were still Japanese hiding out in the jungle. Yes.
Didn't know the war was over?
Didn't know, and for some odd reason, I never really clarified this, they would manage to get into the mess hall and eat their lunch or dinner.
That's
How
funny.
they did that, I don't know. But anyway, then I went to Japan. I was stationed in Hokkaido with the Air Force there as well. That beautiful island, the island of Hokkaido. I was in Chitose. And then instead of going home the normal way, I never do anything the normal way, which would have been by plane. I had orders to go by plane. My tour was over. I went on a freighter, 3rd class, with a good friend of mine who was also Red Cross. The freighter's name was the Vietnam. And we left out of Yokohama, and we went to Hong Kong. I guess we were Yokohama to Saigon. And we should have only spent 2 days in Saigon, but we spent a week because that was the beginning of the problems. The Vin Zin was the trial and all that, and they wouldn't let the ship out. They let it in. We were there a week, and that was very, very interesting because I have to point out that prior to my going abroad, I really was very naive about politics. What I was saying is that I had a very good education about the truth regarding the political and economic situation in the Far East, which we were not being told. We had people like Lattimore and Wiedemeyer, all sorts of, that we were depending on for the truth coming out of, these were State Department people. But anyway, our policies were absolutely incorrect. We supported Chiang Kai-shek in the beginning, and then we pulled the rug out from under him. And we all know what happened to MacArthur, the great General Douglas MacArthur, who wanted to go through into the northern part, to go up against the Chinese.
Right. And they wouldn't let him do that.
No, and Truman fired him and all that. So what I was getting there was a totally different story about what was going on. And actually, my friend and I, we were young and pretty and all, we would be invited up to first class to go swimming with these two young, very attractive young men who were with the UN. I think they were Scandinavian. And so one day I was sunning myself by the pool on the Vietnam, and these children just kept splashing me. And they splashed me and splashed me and splashed me, and I kept saying, don't, please, don't. S'il vous plaît, ne fais pas ça. You know, and finally, this very distinguished gentleman comes over to me and he says, Mademoiselle, he starts to talk to me about, he knows I'm American, the American role in pulling the rug out from under France in Indochina. He was the prefect for France. He was in charge of that region, France, right? And I just said, look, I happen to agree with him. So we had his children go and splash me. It was just to aggravate me, you know. And I said, well, you've got the wrong person because I happen to agree with you 100%, you know. Just like now, I mean, if you, foreigners, you know, if there are any foreigners watching this film, they have to understand that the majority of Americans do not support the horrible, evil policies coming out of our government, and that have been coming out of our government for years. There is nothing new about this. So please forgive us, or forgive our government, and then you're going to say, well, why do you keep voting them in? Well, because we never have a choice. But, so I moved on, and I thought, well, I love traveling, so then I went into the State Department, and my first assignment was, well, I was in Soviet affairs in Washington for about a year, Soviet and Eastern European affairs, and that was very, very interesting.
Now, did your father arrange that? How did that come about?
No, I just got a job as a plain old secretary.
Okay.
You know, but I was good, and I got, you know, whenever John Foster Dulles had, because that was Dulles' time too. First of all, I went into Middle Eastern affairs, and I had 2 years there, Syria, Lebanon. That was very, very interesting. That was during the Suez Canal crisis,
right.
And then I went into Soviet affairs, which was also very interesting. But in Middle Eastern affairs, Secretary Dulles' office always would call, I don't know, they would call the secretary's pool or something and say, send us one of your best stenographers. So they'd always call me, and I never forget one amusing incident with Golda Meir and Abba Eban. Very important. I don't know whether Eban's still alive. Golda Meir is Israel, and this was a Suez Canal or something. I don't know what was going on, but all hell was, excuse me, breaking loose. And we were all sitting there, and I was sitting next to Golda Meir, and Abba Eban was over there, and Dulles is there, and all of a sudden someone kicks me. I'm taking notes, and I'm kicked, and Golda Meir said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." She said, "I meant to kick Abba because he shouldn't talk so fast." So anyway, those are funny little things. And I spent enough time in the State Department in Washington to get a very good picture of the Middle East and of our relations with the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. Then I went to, my first assignment was South Africa. That assignment didn't last very long because I became ill with hepatitis and I had to be shipped home. It was lovely, South Africa. I mean, I lived in Cape Town, lived in Pretoria, and my father had grown up in South Africa.
Wow.
Yes, so he lived there 15 years. My grandfather, 20, he was a mining engineer, and we can talk about that when we get into the order material. And
that must involve people like Cecil Rhodes.
Oh, yes, yes. And so I came home, and then they offered me an assignment. Ambassador Douglas MacArthur II, as the general's nephew, has just been assigned to Brussels, and he needs a secretary. And we'd like you to meet with him, so next week or something. So in the meantime, I talked to some Foreign Service people, and they said, whoa, well, we better just tell you he's the most difficult person to work for in the Foreign Service. it's going to be a rough road, Charlotte, a rough road for you. And I thought, well, I really would like, I love Europe, and I'd like to go to Brussels. And so I went, and actually, I really liked him enormously. I never had a problem with Doug MacArthur. He was temperamental. He was married to Alvin Barkley's daughter, Wawi, who really was a bit of a problem. And maybe that's why he was so temperamental, I don't know. But that was the Congo crisis. See, I just kept moving from getting into areas that were extremely...
Volatile?
Yes, volatile and important. And I was, all the cables were coming in from Leopoldville, Elizabethville, Katanga, and the reports of the UN, you know, the atrocities the UN committed down there, the nuns, and all this stuff. And we'd be working until, you know, 2, 3 a.m. in the morning. I must say one thing, for State Department people can say they don't work hard. Well, they do. Even when I was in Washington, I was in the office often at 1 a.m. You know, Suez Canal, a crisis arrived, you're there. Anyway, we did work very hard. And so I spent 2 wonderful years in Brussels, and I met my husband in Belgium. My husband just recently passed away, and he was a great patriot. He was a marvelous guy, and who became an American when we moved back here. And he helped me enormously with all my work. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to do anything without him. He passed away in May, and I met him on a train. We were going skiing, and he was a big motorcyclist, and one day he turned up in the embassy after we just met on the train. We said, well, see ya. And then he came back to the embassy one day, and receptionist called me down. There he was in his motorcycle outfit. And subsequently we were married, and we moved back. We were married in the United States. We moved back to Belgium for 6 years. He was a yacht captain, and then he bought a schooner, an olden schooner in France, and I had one child over there, and then he sailed it across the ocean back down to Grenada in the West Indies, and he chartered from 1967 to 74, and that was a lovely part of our life. But again, we were in Grenada. Not a hot spot yet. But I could watch the activities from our house. We had this house that watched, you know, looked out over the marina. And I knew when boats were coming in that were problem boats, that when there were people coming in who were either with drugs or you know,
drugs, arms,
making problems for the Grenadians, opposed to the government, opposition groups, and finally we left. And I remember saying to my Grenadian friends, because we still have a lot of them, really, they're wonderful people, wonderful country. You can come and stay with us when you know what hits the fan, because it's going to. The gals who worked for us told us these things. They said, you know, the Peace Corps, the American Peace Corps had people going all over the world causing trouble. And she said that she knew of some young people that were blowing up yachts.
Wow.
Yep.
That's kind of the opposite of peace, right?
Yes. The opposite of what thinks about with the Peace Corps. And I'm sure that, you know, there are many good people in the Peace Corps, and I doubt that that is their agenda, but we have to understand that there isn't a single organization, agency, whatever you want to call it, including our group here, maybe it's my dachshund who is infiltrated, but that doesn't get infiltrated. So I knew, and so we did go back, and then of course the worst Soviet regime that ever existed took ground in Grenada. And of course we didn't go in to save the students at the medical school there. We went in because of the oil lines. And also we did have big concerns about the Soviets building a submarine base at the end of the island, and I think that was true. So there I was again in a sort of a volatile place, came back home. I don't know why we ever really left Grenada. I do know why. I thought, how can I bring up 2 young children in Grenada. What kind of an education are they going to have? Well, I should have realized that had we left them there, they would have had a very good education because the schools were based on the old English system. But anyway, so we moved to Camden, Maine. I put my children into the public schools in Camden, Maine. And then Charlotte's education really begins. I couldn't believe what had happened to my country. I'd left in '53, really. And I came back in '70.
Wow, you were gone a while.
Yes. And it was like I had left, you know, the American flag, motherhood, apple pie, all that, parades, love of country, love of family.
And you're coming back to hippies and...
Well, you know, we had some hippies on ours, because we did chartering. My husband, that was a charter schooner that we had. And we had hippies on our boat from time to time. Hippies often have lots of money, you know. So we had some real radicals on our boat from time to time. Not from time to time, once. Once. And so I knew that there were problems back in the USA. But when I got back, it was just like our country had changed. It was like night and day. And then I became, because the children were going to have to go to school, I thought, well, I better find out what's going on in the school. So I innocently went over to the principal in the elementary school, and I asked him, because of my interest in foreign affairs, if I could see the social studies textbooks.
Right.
And he very foolishly gave me the teacher's manual.
Really?
And it was called World of Mankind, this social studies series by Follett. And I have to say right now that I don't know why he gave that to me. First of all, why he gave me the teacher's manual, but why did he give me a social studies textbook that actually the teachers at that time would refuse to use?
Huh.
But it had been selected by the school board and our new change agent superintendent. We'll get into change agents later. And because I looked at it and I couldn't believe it. It said right in the beginning, this was for the teachers to understand what the course was all about. And it just basically said, all of this, folks, is in my book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America.
Right.
I believe it's in the preface, what I'm going to say right now. Or it may be later on somewhere. But anyway, basically, it said that it was a humanistic curriculum, and it had been developed to help the first graders, mind you, and second graders, to have a more open viewpoint towards different lifestyles, different views, the parts of the world, or everything. And I thought, what is this? I mean, what is this? And so then there was one little exercise in it that had the teachers taking a little tots in town. We lived in Camden, Maine, so you have captain's houses, beautiful houses right next to trailers, and you know, we didn't have any zoning in Maine then. And so then she would say to the little tots, who do you think lives in that big house there, the captain's house with the cupola? And who do you think lives across the street in the little house or the trailer or whatever? And they'd say, well, it must be very rich people there, and I guess they're poor over there, you know, and what do you think they eat there, and what do you think they eat, you know? And I thought, what is going on here? This is class warfare. This is the beginning of class warfare.
Is this what initially made the light bulb go off in your head, like there's something really wrong?
Sort of.
Or was it before this?
That is what made the light bulb go off in my head. And then I went to this too. I went to a school board meeting, and I really thought that my concerns were very legitimate. And so I just said that I was appalled to see this being used. It wasn't being used yet, but he led me to believe it was, with first graders. And the newspaper picked it up. It was on the front page, and I had teachers, you know, elementary school teachers are calling me saying, thank you so much. We don't want to use that book. We put it on the bottom shelf. Good for you. Anyway,
Wow.
That wasn't so good for me because we had someone living with us. We had a rental in our house. We had a captain's house, and we weren't all that rich. We had a rental apartment, and this couple were very intelligent. They'd been stationed in Scotland, I think, because he would go out on the oil rigs, and they'd come back, and we got along very well with them. And she came to me the next day. She came to me and said, "Charlotte, I just went down to the co-op. You know, and back then in the 70s, everybody would buy cheese and chocolate and whatever at the co-op. And she said, the word is out." And I said, "What's the word?" She said, "You're a kook."
Okay.
And I said, "I'm a kook? Why?" And she said, "Well, evidently, the newspaper, did a pretty good job on you, and someone got the word out that you're a kook." So that's when I started thinking, something's wrong. So that, of course, is, this business, you're in it too, Kevin.
Yes.
We all are. It's like eating peanuts.
Mm-hmm.
Don't put peanuts out there in front of me. You eat one peanut, you want another
Yeah,
peanut.
20 more.
So you just end up spending your whole life eating these.
Yeah.
I wish this stuff did taste as good as peanuts. But anyway, we just don't give up. We become addicted to the fact, addicted to finding out how and who could be so evil in our own public schools, where our children are basically captive. They have to go to do this. It's bad enough what they've been doing in universities for years, but at least college students are old enough to,
Think for
talk
themselves.
back and get out if they want. But these are little kids, and the parents are so trusting. And in a way, I don't blame them, because I was trusting back then too. I mean, you figure that sort of in loco parentis they're meant to be. And this doesn't mean all teachers by any means, because as I just pointed out.
Yeah.
But so I became quite involved in checking on what was going on and all, and I would write letters to the paper. And then one day, this is probably the big light bulb, although that is too. There's several. That was probably the big one to get me looking closely at what was going on. A teacher, a retired teacher, called me, and she'd taught all over the world. She was what you'd call a master teacher. And she said, "I've been reading your letters to the paper, and you're absolutely correct." She said, "I don't know if you know how right you are, but you are." She said, "I have been involved in this for years. I've seen the retraining going on. It's been going on for many, many years. It's really started, certainly before World War II even." And she said, I would like to pay for you to go for some teacher training." Well, I said, "I'm not a teacher." She said, "It doesn't make any difference." And she paid $100 for me to go to in-service training for teachers and principals in Searsport, Maine. And I went, and there were all these very normal-looking people there, nice people, like, most educators are really, basically very, very good people, or they wouldn't really have gone into education.
Right.
And there was a book, thank heavens, a great big fat textbook type of thing that we could all, it came with $100, and it was called Innovations in Education, a Change Agent's Guide. So for all of us out there who have to hear the word change agent all the time now, as if it was a chocolate chip cookie, don't think, folks, that change agents are anything other than pure evil. And I will tell you why. And the word change, don't accept that word unless you get people to define their terms. But anyway, this was a guide. This book had about, I don't know how many different examples of true, not stories, but true situations where either a guidance counselor or a science teacher or whoever would be able to to teach a course in sex ed, drug ed, or whatever. Ordinarily, one wouldn't think of these courses being geared to do anything other than to help your children not go on drugs, not to participate in sex.
But isn't it just the opposite?
Yes, just the opposite. So, first of all, you have these little stories of how the teacher, and these are true stories, managed to con the community into accepting it. How the teacher would go up against the resistors. Resistors. And that just blew my mind. I thought, resistors? How to identify resistors? I said, I'm a resistor. I don't like that. I've just come from countries where they identify resistors. I didn't know we did that in the United States.
Huh.
And
so how was this done? How were resistors identified?
Oh, well, they would be me. When I go in and say I don't like this, taking the little children on a walk in town to identify big and little houses, a program to begin class warfare. I'm a resistor. I'm resisting the changes in education, be they no grammar, no math skills, revolting sex ed, immoral whatever, you know, which has just gotten worse and worse and worse, to the point of absolute unbelievable stuff down in Massachusetts with that terrible curriculum. I don't even want to talk about it. So anybody any parent, well, you know what, it's just I mean, I would say 99% of the parents in this country, if they knew what was going on, that's a big if, would be a resistor. So you've got to identify all these parents. Unfortunately, there aren't enough parents. Now, there are a lot of teachers who are resistors, too. They have, I think, been more abused, victimized than the children. And we can talk about that.
Yeah.
You know, so I came home with my big book under my arm, and my husband, I was meant to go back the next Saturday, but I was so sickened by it that I didn't go. And he said, you know, you should have gone. And I later found out I probably should have gone because the principal from our school was there. And he said, hey, Charlotte, where were you? And he said, you really would have gotten a lot out of last Saturday because he talked about Hitler and how the Nazi system worked.
Huh.
And, you know, I've never asked that principal exactly what. And I could have because he's the father of a very good friend of Sam's. I always wondered, but I think I just didn't want to know.
Huh.
I just didn't want to know what on earth they were talking about Hitler for. Anyway, then I ran for the school board. I was on school board, and I insisted on seeing all of the programs. The superintendent was a change agent out of Harvard, who admitted to me when he found out that he told me that, he said, why did you go to, he knew because I accused him of being a change agent. And he said, yeah, I am. And he said, and I said, well, I've been to courses. He said, how'd you know? I said, I've been to courses. He said, why did you go to courses? I could have taught you all you need to know. This is my Harvard-educated change agent, superintendent. And I said, Tom, I don't need to go to any change agent training that you might have. All I have to do is sit across from you at a board meeting and watch you manipulate the board.
Now, how is this manipulation done? What did you see?
Oh, it's through semantic deception, and basically everybody probably figures that, you know, they all speak a different language that sounds so good, like basic skills. That they don't mean basic skills is understanding the Constitution is dead. Huh? That's a basic skill now. But anyway, he was very clever. What he would do, he would get agreement basically from the board with a vote to take place 6 months from then. Then they'd do all the work, the teachers would get all the training. Then he'd come back and he'd tell you that it was in. Everything had been done. And, you know, that sort of thing really bothered me. And I would ask questions, and I really aggravated everybody on the board. I mean, I was asking to see the programs, the National Diffusion Network. that was a group in Maine, and every state really has that National Diffusion Network. Federally funded values-changing rotten programs would be developed out in the field, actually by what would subsequently become my old office, funded by what would subsequently become my old office under the Reagan Administration. The worst programs you ever saw, like positive attitude toward learning, and you see always these gimmicky titles, and value changing, total value changing, no absolutes, got to get rid of absolutes. And so Maine, because we always want money here, because we're a real socialist state here in Maine, welfare state, and we would take every bit of money we could get, every program. We got a gold medal from the U.S. Office of Education for having most programs. So I was really sitting in a state that was a pilot for all the changes during the 70s and 80s, and people don't realize that most of the young people now, and those up to 50 years old, or they think that the major problems that we're having in education just sort of started fairly recently, and that it's the school to work agenda, that no longer do they have ABCD, their group grades and all this. They think these problems, they don't realize that we fought the big battles regarding destroying our children's values. Were fought in the 60s and 70s, I would say, and into the 80s. And those programs were very destructive. And I would never go up against a program unless I'd actually taken the training. I went to, Sidney Simon was a very important person, but sociologist, who developed his values clarification, which is nothing more than values destruction. And he came up to Maine to do a conference, and I went to go through the in-service training because I wanted to see what it was. So, folks, don't ever talk about anything unless you've sort of been through it yourself. This is a perfect example of how to destroy values. So during that particular in-service training, he talked about how if a young man decides to be a priest, and he comes from a family, a Catholic family, and from very young age he's been encouraged, to go to church and the Catholic catechism and all this and that. His decision to become a priest is not legitimate because he hasn't made that decision on his own. He's been influenced by these evil people like his family or whatever. And I thought, oh, well. So we had lunch, it was a big buffet at the Holiday Inn, and I was right behind him, and he picked, for dessert he had lemon meringue pie. And I said to him, I poked on his shoulder, I said, did your mother used to make lemon meringue pie for you? He was really taken aback. He said, yes. And I said, well, then your selection of lemon meringue pie really isn't a legitimate selection, is it?
And how did he react to that?
Oh, he was not. They don't have any sense of humor at all, these vipers. No, zero. So those were my years on the school board. I did manage to get rid of the values clarification, but the minute I was off the board, it came back in.
And it came in under different guise?
Yeah, it came back in under, I think he got it in under decision-making, which I told him he could not do with me, because the day after we voted it out,
now, you were already on the Board of Education at this point in time, right?
Yes.
Now, how did that come about? How did you actually get onto your local Board of Education?
Oh, it took me 3 times, 3 votes. I worked to get on for 3 years.
Wow.
And boy, I was detested. Everybody, the groups in town that's the other thing about when they said you identify the resistors, the good people who are opposed to these programs. They've also taught us how to go and identify the important people in the community with the Rotary, the Chamber of Commerce, Historical Society, Garden Club, all those groups, and go to them. And you say, well, Mrs. Iserbyt is she's a very nice woman, and I understand she's traveled a lot, and she's very intelligent, but she just doesn't understand the needs of our society now, or the needs of our community. And, we hope that you will support us in putting this particular program in. We need a new guidance program, or we have a real problem. And you know what? Every time, if you check to see where they put these programs, we always thought this was quite amusing. It was usually where there was no problem. You didn't have a lot of kids who were fooling around with sex. You didn't have a lot of kids who were having drinking problems or drugs. And that always interested me until I found out that the purpose, basically, was to create the problem. And the reason the way I found that out, it's in here. One day I was I was just fortunate enough to get a hold of the guidance counselors, the National Guidance Counselor Association's journal called The Counselor or something. And it was a special edition on death and death education. And in there, I wonder why they admit these things, but really it is sort of strange that anybody would have found this, except me. In there it said, we will use death education to change the students' attitudes and values about death and dying, the same way we used sex education to change their attitudes and values regarding sex and various sexual practices. And I went, ah!
Cat's out of the bag, right?
I mean, how? That was the most dynamite quote. Because enough of us by that time, when I got this information out, knew what the results had been. Absolute catastrophe, as I just said. They'd go into towns where there was no problem, and they'd create the problem. And then they'd need more people to deal with it, more guidance, more this, more that. And then they'd take money away from the programs they wanted to get rid of, like, we haven't had history for many, many years, but math skills, reading skills, etc. And so that's why I say deliberate. Yeah. Totally deliberate. So anyway, yes, 3 years on that. And then after I got off of the board, a very wonderful woman here in Maine, who was a public school teacher herself and a nurse, retired, she moved up to Maine from Connecticut. And she's very bright. And she had been told that I was, she was down in Cushing, and Cushing, Maine was the pilot for the comprehensive health education being put into Maine, and with something like $1 million from the Kellogg Foundation. Yeah. And I got a hold of all the documents. I don't know how. They all landed in they came out of California. It was called the Berkeley model. Berkeley, California model. But anyway, so when I got off the local school board, when I was voted off of it, as I said, all the things that I had done, I got 5 minutes of grammar a day. 5 minutes a day of grammar, if you can imagine, when we should have been getting a half an hour, perhaps.
Yes.
But they just didn't want to do it, and they were just giving in to Charlotte. And I got rid of the values clarification. I managed to get a pretty good math program in, and a few things. But when I left, everything was dumped that I had done. And he continued on his merry way. But let me make a point, because this is really rather interesting. For people who feel that they shouldn't go up against these change agent superintendents, this particular fellow, I found out later through someone else, where he said that the only person that he respected in our community was Charlotte.
Because he viewed you as a worthy opponent, perhaps?
Yes, and I knew what I was talking about.
Yes.
And at one board meeting, he said, luckily it wasn't too loud, so the media didn't hear it. He said, we were all of us in this discussion, and he and I were really doing most of it. He finally said, sort of under his breath, Charlotte, look, why can't you and I just discuss this later in the week or something, because nobody else understands what we're talking about. And, so for those people listening to this, you know, good parents out there, you have to understand that you understand probably very well what he's talking about. Often school board members don't ask questions, don't do their homework. You've probably done much more homework than the school board members have. And your superintendent might just, well, be interested in having a talk with you if you bone up on what the subject is. That doesn't mean he's going to change his mind, but don't feel intimidated. Do your homework. And after you've seen this video, you will have plenty to go on. At least I hope that you will feel that you have adequate support for your views.
There's two things I'd like to first have you talk about. A lot of what you're talking about right now involves a lot of the Hegelian dialectic and a lot of what we call chi, problem, reaction, solution.
Yes.
Goes back to Plato and the Republic that he wrote 2,400 years ago, what he called the Third Way.
Right.
Can you get into that a little bit and clarify that for people who are watching at home?
Yes. We could do the seven-pronged fork later, but I do think the dialectic is very important, the Hegelian dialectic, and don't get thrown off by Hegel's name. It could be Smith's or anybody's, a German philosopher. And in order to, well, he took that from
I mean, this goes all the way back to Plato, and even before
Fabian
that.
And Fabian socialism.
Yes.
Back to Plato, yes. Well, the dialectic is this. If you want something, and you know you can't get it the normal way, you have to create a problem in order to get people to scream. Then you can pretty much come in with your solution, whatever you want, and get people to accept it. You have to be clever about it. But let me give you an example, because this is true. When I was first married, I threw a red sweater of mine in with my husband's white shirts. And my sweater ended up the size of a postage stamp, and his shirts were pink. And from that time on, you know, my husband never let me do laundry again. And my two sons.
Don't give my wife any bright ideas.
You've met both of them. They'll tell you. They saw that their father didn't let Mom do the laundry. And so they wouldn't let me do the laundry, and that was just dandy for me. I didn't have to. Now look, if I had wanted never to do laundry again,
Right.
isn't that what I would do? I would create the problem. I would just throw a red sweater in with white shirts, and that would upset whoever, you know, and they would say, you're not allowed to do laundry anymore. Well, so my feeling, and I often tell this story when I give, I don't travel that much anymore, but I always used to, people love that, and they understand that. That makes the dialectic very, very easy for you.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing is with the dialectic, you know, it's usually opposite. You have good versus evil.
Right.
And so if you want to get to change somebody, their position on well, let's say your mother-in-law is dying of cancer, and you don't have enough money to buy the drugs for your mother-in-law. So you, first of all, you believe it's wrong to steal. And on the other end, it's okay to steal. So, but what you do is you keep mixing the two ends together so that you end up in the middle where it's okay to steal sometimes. And then you finally move to the end of the cliff and you fall right off. It's okay to steal anytime. You know, this is the dialectic as well.
You know,
The
it's using elements of...
synthesis and the antithesis.
Yeah,
The
and
thesis and the antithesis. They finally emerge in the middle with the synthesis. And that's what's happened. I think all of us have been subjected to this. I myself, as a mother, as a wife, occasionally, you know, I'll make excuses which will steer me away from my original strong belief or value, because I'll say, oh, well, you know, the world's changing and all kids do this sort of thing nowadays,
right.
And I can't really be that strict or one thing or the other. Well, I mean, I'm just as guilty of it as anybody else, but not to the extent so much of the leadership in our society, right? Think of John Edwards.
Oh, yeah.
Tragic story.
But when you're a member
Yeah.
of the CFR and you're as high-ranking as he is in these types of organizations, in order to raise up that far, you know they got to have a lot of dirt on them.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. They've got to have plenty of dirt. So we will get to the seven-pronged fork, which I think just...
Could you also define for us, you've been talking about change agents and all that.
Yeah.
Can you just give us a brief, good working definition of what one is? Because then people who are watching this, maybe later on in their own communities, wherever they are, they can go, there is a change agent.
Yeah, well, ordinarily, I don't want to forget to deal with the Guardians of Education, the health education curriculum too, right after, because that does
It
has
kind
a
of
lot to do
flows
with
into it.
Yes, a change agent, he or she could be a member of the community even. Doesn't have to be a superintendent or a minister or a doctor. A superintendent, a change agent can come from any group, entity, any organized group, health or religion or law or education or whatever. Our whole world is presently being manipulated by individuals who are known as change agents. And most people really didn't hear this term prior to Bill Clinton getting in office. He used it, Hillary has used it. Prior to that, we had to go out, and the tragedy with this is that most people did not understand the way they use this word, that it's a bad thing. It's when you hear the original term change agent is bad. It means an individual, an agent of change, someone who goes into your community, is highly trained in how to bring about a certain outcome, to create a program that would ordinarily be opposed in the community. Whether it is in, as I said, it could be in any field whatsoever. Now, this whole change in how our communities and our professional groupings operate, this whole change took place after World War II. Ordinarily, we were governed by elected officials without any of these appointed task forces and councils that are set up. The accountability remained strictly with the elected official, which is as it should be. And I mean, myself, I mean, they knocked me off the school board. Okay, right, good, fine, that's all right.
Yeah.
They didn't like me for the wrong reasons, because they've been lied to and everything, but still, the people voted, and they have the right to get rid of me. But these people were making decisions now and presenting their reports. This is a very important subject that I'd like to go into more depth later, because
Sure.
Our whole form of government is shifting gradually, so that eventually we will have nothing but unelected councils running our country through the regional government system. But the change agents had to come about first. And they became very influential in redirecting Americans' thinking in regard to whatever, education. Let's especially stick with education. After World War II. And many of them came out of the Office of Strategic Services during World War II. And one of the leading ones was German, Kurt Lewin. And how they managed to get the funding, I think the National Education Association was the first one to come up with the funding for the National Training Laboratories. And the first laboratory, it always amazes Mainers when I tell them this, was established in Bethel, Maine. And now these laboratories are all over the world. They have a big one in New York, in Washington, D.C. I know they have them in Europe. And it's all part of the sensitivity training movement, Esalen, the group process, etc., the goal of which is to surreptitiously, to train individuals to surreptitiously get programs approved by the innocent, unsuspecting members of the community who have been accustomed in the past to elected officials making decisions and being able to vote yes or no and not have their votes taken away from them by task force reports, etc., with big gold stamps on them.
Well, we've been chased in by a very strong storm that's come through here in Maine, and we're still sitting here with Charlotte Iserbyt, and we're going to be taking a different look at some other subject matter. And I wanted you to talk about first your father and his significance in your life and to what it is we're talking about today.
All right. My dad, Clifton Thompson, was the son of Samuel C. Thompson, and the family came from Pottsville, Pennsylvania, originally, and goes way back to the pre-revolution when they came over from Scotland. And I really do believe that they were Masonic. The Thompson family had real Masonic connections as well. But I knew nothing about this when I was growing up. I had no idea what a Mason was. The Order of Skull and Bones was just something that was never really talked about in the house.
Right.
The only thing that ever sort of related to the Skull and Bones was the clock that is now out in the studio. My father had, each member was tapped for Skull and Bones in their junior year when they, I think when they get married, they get a clock. And it has the number, my dad's number is on the pendulum in it. Mm. And the only thing Dad ever really said that I thought was sort of weird was, you've got to keep the clock wound. Don't let the clock ever stop on its own. And so we were always making sure the clock was wound. My father was never in any position for making policy, good, bad, or indifferent. He was just a lawyer. He was the mayor of the town. He was a conservative. He went to church every Sunday. He was an Episcopalian. He was a wonderful, wonderful man, and I just adored him. And he never was involved in anything like they would have been. In fact, he was a lawyer for a French corporation during the war, and he found out that they were dealing with the Nazis, and he quit. And that's not the way most Skull and Bones people would do. You know, these people, they play both sides. And so Dad was very, very honorable, and I believe my grandfather was too. But then there was this other gentleman who was also not involved, who I was very fond of, and he would visit often, and my husband and I even met with him in Brussels, you know, after we were married. And he was never, so what I'm trying to say here is that just because someone is with the order doesn't necessarily mean that they are at all involved. Now, they've got to know what it stands for. It's a secret society. It's just like the Masons or any other secret society, and they're sworn not to say a word. I mean, Dad did say that to us, you know, that this is something that was never to be discussed, that we know. Now, at the end of his life, this is a funny year. My dad was dying of cancer down in New Jersey, and my sister and I took care of him. And she'd take 2 months, and I'd take 2 months or something. But I was down there most of the time, and we, at that time, I had been very involved in trying to get the regulations adopted for the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, to protect the children against all the things that we've been talking about today, right? Mm-hmm. And that bill did pass in 1978, the Protection of Pupil Rights. did pass, but the amendment. But it had to have regulations. So when I got into the department during my brief stint there, I was very involved in getting regulations written. And after I got out, I contacted Phyllis Schlafly and sort of I was really the one who got Phyllis moving on education. And we held these hearings, regional hearings. The government held these regional hearings to take testimony from parents and teachers all over the country. And Phyllis, which was good, she put all the hearings into this book. It's a very important book. People should, who do go to my book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, if you go to my website, deliberatedumbingdown.com, you can read that book. It's a free download. Child Abuse in the Classroom. And that summer, we worked all the time on the phone, Phyllis and I. And we were talking about everything. So my father had to listen to because the phone was downstairs, and we had put a separate bedroom for him down next to the kitchen. And we had that built on because it was a very old 1750 English farmhouse. And he was upstairs before. And finally, after having heard that, about a month before he died, he looked at me and he said, maybe it was after a phone call with Phyllis, I don't know, Char, if I had the time, I'd help you. And I think that was, because at one point, when we were talking about global education and world government and all this and that, I can't believe this here. My father was such a conservative, such a patriotic guy, everything. And I was talking about world government, and he said, well, I don't think it's ever really going to happen, and what's so bad about that? And I looked at him and I said, what happens? What constitution are we going to have? And he looked at me, he said, oh, he had a cigar. He took a cigar. He said, well, we'll take care of that when the time comes. And I said, oh, really? And I think that got him thinking.